Welcome to the pilot compartment of the B-52. The B-52 has been in production for a very long time. The H model was developed in the early 1960s, and many of its systems still reflect the technology of that era. Today, most pilots rarely fly large jet aircraft manually to the extent required on this platform. The B-52 is a very hands-on aircraft. It still requires continuous pilot input and attention. Unlike most modern aircraft, this one truly relies on its crew. Before going any further, it's worth noting an interesting aspect of the B-52's design. The traditional flight engineer and co-pilot roles were combined into one. On this side of the cockpit are located the fuel management panel, the electrical systems, and the engine start controls, all of which would normally be handled by a flight engineer. This integration was introduced to reduce the crew size while maintaining full system functionality. Now let's take a look around the cockpit and see what's here. Starting from the aircraft commander's side, on the far left edge of the panel is the Pylon Jettison consent, the control that authorizes pylon release. This area falls under the aircraft commander's responsibility. By the way, all functionality related to weapons will be implemented later and released as a separate add-on, since MSFS is primarily a civilian simulator and does not allow direct integration of any weapon systems. The interphone power switch is usually turned on right after the battery to establish communication with the crew located on the two cockpit levels. Proper communication is crucial, since different crew members cannot see each other during operation. This is the suit heating switch. It is an outdated system and is no longer in use. This is the lighting control panel of the left side of the cockpit. It includes separate instrument lighting, flood lighting, and allows configuring any preferred setup. Similar panels are located on the right console and on the overhead panel. Lighting setup will be demonstrated later when moving on to flight operations. This is the circuit breaker panel for the left side. These breakers are not used during standard flight operations. Next, there are the power switches for the Mach Indicator and the Gyro power. Generally, these remain on throughout the entire flight. This is the oxygen supply control panel. Next, we have the Transponder Panel, which implements only the standard modes used in civilian aviation. On this small panel, there is a switch that allows changing the multifunctional display modes. It toggles the display between the forward-looking infrared FLIR and EVS enhanced vision system images, or the navigation screen display. Next, we move on to the hydraulic panel. Mr. Boeing was kind enough to provide us with a wiring diagram here. So, if you get confused about the system or aren't sure which standby pumps supply a particular system, you can always refer to this diagram. These are the main body systems, powered by engine-driven pumps on all engines except the second and eighth. This means that with the engines running, hydraulic pressure is always available. Additionally, there are several standby pumps on the body systems, as well as on the wings, to ensure operation in case of engine failure. They usually operate at around 3,000 psi plus or minus 250. In the lower quadrant, there are 4 pumps for the rudder and elevator system, located at the rear of the aircraft. Additionally, this panel includes the primary and right-hand body hydraulic systems for the munition release systems. This is the intercom panel, audio mixer, where communication devices can be configured, as well as audio from various navigation systems. Liquid oxygen display. Let's stow the yoke for now so it doesn't get in the way. This panel contains the anti-icing controls, as well as the windshield anti-ice and defogging systems. This panel allows selecting different FLIR and EVS modes, depending on the flight configuration required. The Enhanced Vision System, EVS, has been implemented at the level currently supported by the SDK. Here, the EVS system can be activated. These buttons switch between different modes, while this row of buttons controls the camera direction. The camera is aligned with the flight vector during landing and can also be fixed to the center. When this button is pressed, the camera is controlled by the crab lever for nose wheel steering. This knob allows manual rotation of the camera, while in a fixed position. This system is particularly useful for night flights and challenging weather conditions. How could one do without the trusty wind-up clock? I'm sure you'll be able to figure out its functionality on your own. There's nothing complicated here. This is an old-school flight course indicator, used as a backup for precise targeting and munitions release. It will be implemented together with the weapons module. This is the emergency landing gear, release and retraction panel. It isn't really needed in the simulator, so it is not functional. This is the engine fire test switch and the highly useful windshield wipers, especially in bad weather. Now, we move over here. Pilots call this switch George. It is used during the most critical phases of a mission and engages the bomb navigation steering mode. Essentially, at this point, the offensive crew flies the aircraft in control navigation. In our module, it has been implemented a bit differently. Here, George engages automatic autopilot control using TACON and VOR radio navigation or following light plane via GPS. I will cover all the autopilot modes separately. It's worth noting that when switching it on, caution is required. Always monitor the system to ensure that George doesn't think he's a fighter pilot and trying to overstress the wings. This is the bomb bay doors control switch. It allows the crew to open and close the bay doors manually from the cockpit. In our implementation, there are 3 switch positions. Top, closed. Closes the bomb bay. Middle, combat. Opens the doors to the combat operational position. Bottom, ground load. Works only on the ground with the parking brake set and flaps up. In this position, the bomb bay opens fully for loading of munitions, and also opens the crew entry hatch. This is the lateral trim indicator. During pre-flight inspection, it is always checked together with the crew chief to ensure the aircraft is in the correct trim configuration. All right, this is a standard standby attitude gyro, found on almost every instrument-equipped aircraft in the world. This is the Mach Indicator. The maximum flight speed of the Stratofortress is Mach 0.84. The markings on the instrument casing indicate this limitation. The Directional Gyro Indicator. This is course synchronization button. It is very important to always synchronize the directional gyro before flight. Next, the round dial true airspeed indicator. The MDF display certainly shows digital data, but it is important in flight to cross-check the analog and digital readings with the offensive crew, the bombardiers, to determine which ones are more accurate. Radar altimeter includes a minimum altitude setting knob combined with an auto test button. This is the primary flight instruments. It includes the VSI, vertical speed indicator, airspeed indicator, altimeter, HSI, horizontal situation indicator, and the attitude gyro. I will cover all of these instruments and their functions in detail later in the navigation and flight section. The indicators you see here at the top were mainly used for terrain avoidance flight profiles. However, this feature is not implemented in our module. This is the multi-function display MFD. It is primarily used as horizontal situation display and for displaying all necessary navigation information. As mentioned earlier, it can also show the EVS image. A detailed guide on using the MFD will be provided later in the navigation section. This is the Master Caution Panel. Here it is possible to check that all the warning lights are functioning. All indicators are labeled and self-explanatory. We will refer to them throughout the tutorial, so their use will become clear. This button is used to reset some indicators that have a corresponding reset inscription. This is the Master Caution Light button. I don't think it requires any further explanation. This is the Stability Augmentation System SAS, covering the yaw and pitch channels. In the yaw quadrant, there are 3 channels. If one is lost, a warning appears on the indicator. After that, it can simply be manually kicked off. This is the Fuel Totalizer. It also allows setting the gross weight, which is then used to determine what is called the best flare speed for landing. It works very simply. First, the gross weight needs to be determined. Here, we can see that it is 345,000 pounds. Then, rotate the indicator to align the weight on the inner scale with the fuel totalizer needle. The optimal landing speed is then displayed on the outer edge of the scale. As fuel is consumed, the fuel needle continuously indicates the optimal speed, so it doesn't need to be recalculated each time. This is the flaps indicator. Flaps extend up to 35 degrees, but the instrument shows their position as a percentage. As a reminder, the B-52 takes off and lands with the flaps fully extended. As you can see, these are the landing gear position indicators. They show that the gear is down, and this is matched with the landing gear handle here. It will illuminate red if the gear is not in the correct configuration. This is one of the most unique aspects of the Stratofortress, the Crosswind crab system. Unlike many other aircraft, which can use a wing-down top rudder configuration or a crab and kick-out method, the B-52, due to the negative wing dihedral and the tip gears, relies on the Crosswind crab system. To control the gear turn, lift this handle, and the desired crab angle can be set. The gear actually turns based on a calculation predetermined from according this table. For example, if there's a 90-degree crosswind at 40 knots, the handle can be set to 20 degrees, which is quite significant, especially when landing in poor weather. Essentially, the handle is rotated. The gear's movement is verified on the crab position indicator, then the handle is lowered, confirming that the crosswind crab is checked and set. In our implementation, the crab system works as designed. There are MSFS2020 limitations that prevent the proper visualization of the aircraft's movement on the ground when all landing gear wheels are turned. Next, we move on to the engine monitoring panel. Obviously, there are a lot of needles and gauges to keep an eye on. One of the unique features of the B-52 is that it's equipped with 8 Pratt & Whitney TF33 engines, each capable of producing 17,000 pounds of thrust at takeoff power. These are very important fire indicators. In case of an engine fire warning, pulling this handle cuts off the hydraulic, fuel, and electrical systems for that engine. It's best not to touch them unless absolutely necessary, since once an engine has been shut down this way, it cannot be restarted. EPR gauge, engine pressure ratio. Next is the engine compressor, RPM indicator, which we use to set the desired engine power. Below that is the exhaust gas temperature, EGT gauge. And on the bottom row, we have the fuel flow indicators. And these fuel flow indicators feed their data into the total fuel flow indicator here. During cruise flight, we often refer to specific fuel flow readings. This helps stabilize the aircraft and maintain better control throughout the flight. All right, moving on. These indicators are part of the air refueling system. Essentially, when the aircraft is ready for contact, the blue light comes on. Once actual contact is established, meaning the KC-135, KC-10, or KC-46 has a solid connection, the green light illuminates. And when a disconnect occurs, the yellow light comes on. This provides visual confirmation that the refueling system is functioning properly. Here we have all engine oil pressure indicators. This is the trusty wet compass and G-force indicator, which unfortunately is not very accurate. Of course, the aircraft isn't subjected to high G-forces, but it is limited to a maximum of 2 Gs. Moving upward, we see the refueling system panel and the refueling switches. To activate, the refuel valve and master refuel switch must be turned on. This allows the aircraft to receive fuel, as well as transfer it to specific tanks throughout the aircraft. We have slipway lights to illuminate the receptacle at night, so the refueling operator, the boomer, can see where to connect and refuel the aircraft. On top of that, it looks spectacular during night flights. The slipway door's light indicates whether the refueling doors are correctly positioned, open or closed. There is a primary and an alternate system, so if, for some reason, one hydraulic system fails, the doors can still be opened to receive fuel. It is also possible to switch to manual mode using signal power. where the refueling operator physically inserts the nozzle into the aircraft. Once the correct configuration is achieved, the system can be set to hold, and refueling can begin. This is the VOR radio terminal and the TAC and navigation system. As you can see, that's a very old system, but it is still functional and highly reliable. In our simulator, TACON is used as NAV1 radio, and its channels are automatically converted to VOR frequencies, which can be seen in the tooltips when adjusting the tuning knob. The VOR radio is used as NAV2 in the simulator, and is used for setting VOR and ILS frequencies for instrument approaches. Next are the COM1 and COM2 radio control panels. For convenience, if you don't want to deal with all these old radio systems, we've provided an option to enable modern avionics. It can be activated from the options menu located on the glare shield. Now on the pilot side panel, we can see the standard avionics with NAV1 and NAV2 radio unit, as well as COM1 unit, and the standard transponder. This is the central console lighting panel and the external lighting switches. It controls the cockpit flood lighting, which can be set to red or white. This switch turns on bright white flood lighting in the cockpit, mainly used during night flights and thunderstorms, to prevent pilots from being blinded by lightning flashes outside. This switch controls the navigation lights. They can be set to bright or dim, and a strobed mode is also available. Don't forget to turn on the beacon light when starting the engines. And at the very end of the console is the instructor intercom, whose station is located behind the pilot's ejection seats. Unlike many other Boeing aircraft, where the aircraft commander's side has a nose wheel steering control, the B-52 features takeoff, landing, and taxi configurations. The Stratofortress has a much greater nose wheel steering angle in taxi mode, up to 55 degrees at full deflection, allowing the aircraft to turn almost on the spot. When switching to takeoff/landing mode, the nose wheel deflection is significantly limited, helping to maintain alignment with the runway centerline during takeoff and landing. This is the stabilizer trim indicator. It shows the current configuration of the stabilizer trim. This is the pneumatic system control panel. Here, you can select ram air or cabin pressure. The off position. Then, normal flight configuration is 7.45 psi. Unlike many modern Boeing aircraft, there isn't a sophisticated cabin pressurization system. It simply climbs according to the standard schedule. There is also the combat configuration, set at 4.5 psi, primarily designed so that, in the event of damage or a hit, it would prevent a massive catastrophic blowout. One thing I missed in the upper quadrant, related to the pneumatic system, is the cabin altitude gauge. During flight, it typically shows around 8,000 feet up to certain altitudes. Returning here, this is what we call the thrust gate. The B-52 does not have auto throttle or electronic thrust control systems. Instead, the thrust gate is used to set a specific engine power setting. It is determined using the takeoff and landing data, and then the throttle levers are advanced to this setting. Essentially, this provides a sort of artificial minimum speed for directional control. On the left and right sides, there are indicator scales used to set and verify this setting. In addition to this, there is a throttle brake lever on the side. Some interesting features of this aircraft. During flight, we obviously use the aft section of the throttle quadrant, which allows all engine levers to be moved synchronously. However, for fine-tuning airspeed, as mentioned earlier, there are no auto throttles on board. It's better to manipulate engines 4 and 5 to achieve symmetrical thrust from the inboard engines and adjust more precisely. Using throttles 4 and 5 allows for very accurate aircraft control. This is the drag chute release lever. The same lever can also be used to jettison it after landing. For convenience, we've created a bind for the annunciator toggle hotkey, which you can set in the simulator settings. You can also enable chute reload in the options panel here, but this can only be done while the aircraft is on the ground. Moving over here, those who have flown World War II aircraft like the B-29 will find the Autopilot familiar, as Autopilot B-52 is not much more advanced. This is the Autopilot Panel, where you can engage roll and pitch modes and altitude hold. There's also a low-level mode switch, which in the current version stabilizes the aircraft's attitude at low altitudes. This switch also activates the air refueling mode. To use it, the main refueling system must be active and the receiver doors open. This is the Autopilot master power switch. Up here is essentially what is used to control the aircraft in autopilot mode. We use the turn knob here. At full deflection, the knob commands the maximum autopilot roll, which is about 40 degrees. This is the pitch trim knob. It allows setting the rate of climb or descent. This is the roll trim knob, used for fine adjustments, down to 0.1 increments on the FCI. Two very important points when using these knobs. First, they must be set to the neutral position before engaging the autopilot. Otherwise, the autopilot will not activate. You can set them to neutral by right-clicking. Second, all autopilot knobs and switches are interconnected, and activating some autopilot modes will block or disable others. So, if a switch won't move to the on position, it means the autopilot is in an incorrect configuration. This is the lateral trim cutout switch and the stabilizer trim cutout switch, in case of a stabilizer trim jam or a hard over of the autopilot. These switches can be used to disengage the affected system. Here's the navigation mode select panel. Using this knob, we choose whether to use GPS, TACAN-VOR radio, or ILS approach modes. The B-52's automatic navigation system is not designed to conduct GPS approaches. The aircraft is certified only under Required Navigation Performance 5, which allows GPS use only for en route navigation at altitude. Essentially, when performing an approach anywhere in the world, we rely on radio beacon navigation using TACAN, VOR, or ILS units. An ILS approach simply displays crossbars on the attitude gyro, which is fairly standard for most flight directors, and provides an ILS solution with wind correction. Unlike the real aircraft, we have added a feature that allows the autopilot to use these navigation modes for automatic navigation. This mode is activated with George switch I mentioned previously. In the down position of the switch labeled pilot, the standard autopilot functions can be used. In the upper position, designated bomb, the autopilot receives guidance in accordance with the selected navigation mode from radio beacons or GPS. In the bomb mode, it is possible to perform an automatic ILS approach or navigate in GPS mode following the flight plan loaded via MFD navigation screen. Moving down here, this is the terrain display. This system is not implemented at the moment. In reality, it is no longer used, as such terrain flight profiles are no longer part of strategic aviation operations. Working here, I've already shown you a bit about the Crosswind crab. There is a button to return the crab to neutral. When held in the closed position, it functions as a rudder trim, allowing you to set the rudder trim according to this scale. This is the external lighting panel. Here we have the terrain clearance light, a spotlight that extends from the aircraft's belly and whose angle can be adjusted. Although it is no longer used in reality, it is still functional. Also on this panel are the landing taxi lights and the crosswind light switches. And one interesting feature here, the aircraft commander, in the event of a total communications failure during a combat scenario, can use this lighting system to communicate. It is currently in off position. For example, if crew members are not at their stations and need to return to their ejection seats or prepare for ditching or bailout, this light can be switched to alert. Looking back into the tunnel, you'll see the light flashing, which non-verbally signals all crew members to return to their positions and prepare for ejection or ditching. Then, from this configuration, it can be switched to Abandon, causing the light to stay on continuously, signaling everyone to egress the aircraft. So, this is the Bailout warning lighting system, used to signal ejection or aircraft abandonment. This is the co-pilot station, probably the most dangerous seat, because there are many areas where mistakes can be made, which can be detrimental to the aircraft, primarily regarding the fuel and center of gravity configuration, which is still set manually. One interesting thing about the B-52 is that it features two different types of cross-checks when moving from the left seat to the right seat. In fact, what you see here is a mirror layout. If you notice, the radar altimeters are positioned opposite each other, forming a mirrored instrument configuration. This is the fuel management panel. One fact that gives you an idea of just how much fuel the B-52 can carry: its tanks hold 321,000 pounds, which is approximately 48,000 gallons of fuel. That's more fuel than you'd probably pump into your car over your entire lifetime. And that's just one full load for this airplane. Of course, the aircraft can't take off with full tanks, because that would exceed its maximum takeoff weight. It's why B-52 required air refueling system. The aircraft has multiple fuel tanks, and this panel shows the complete layout of the tanks, fuel lines, and pumps. Essentially, we can receive and transfer fuel in any configuration across the entire aircraft by these knobs. During flight, we must constantly monitor fuel consumption and redistribute fuel as needed to maintain the correct center of gravity. Additionally, depending on the weapons configuration, if there's any asymmetrical weight distribution, we may need to transfer fuel laterally between tanks to maintain proper lateral balance. All these procedures are performed in accordance with specific fuel management tables designed for the B-52. This instrument is called the Center of Gravity, and FLACK. It's essentially a mini-computer that allows for a manual calculation by taking all fuel readings from our sensors here. The operating gross weight and the weapons configuration are entered, and the unit displays the resulting center of gravity information. The functionality of this instrument will be available in the weapons module. This panel is connected to the air refueling system above. This is the defuel valve, which is primarily used for maintenance purposes, allowing ground crews to drain fuel from the tanks when servicing or inspecting the aircraft. Fuel scavenge. Since we can transfer fuel between multiple manifolds, the main manifold and the cabin manifold, this system allows us to make sure no fuel goes to waste. By activating the scavenge pump, we can move any remaining fuel from these manifolds into main tank system number 2 or number 3, effectively recovering residual fuel and maintaining balance across the system. This is the electrical panel. It looks very similar to what you might have seen on older aircrafts with a flight engineer station. We have 4 120 kilovolt amp generators, very powerful units. The schematic shows a common bus tie, which allows all generators to share the electrical load. The B-52 can operate in multiple power configurations. In case of generator failure, only one generator is actually needed to power all essential systems for flight. However, if we ever find ourselves operating on a single generator, we'll likely need to shed some non-essential electrical load to conserve power. These are the generator overheat indicator lights. And with these switches, we can decouple the generator from the system to prevent it from overheating the oil in the electrical system. To engage a generator when it's powered, the corresponding engine must be running at least 58% RPM. Once the generator is online, we'll see it indicated here on the gauges. At the moment, we're using external power, and the system is configured so that the main buses, which are normally tied to the generators, are now connected through the central bus tie. Here, there is also the option to isolate the central bus. If one of the generators is acting up and is shutting down its bus, or the central bus tie, you can press this button to isolate the central bus and troubleshoot the generators. This button is also used when reconnecting a generator to the network. This is the Hertz indicator, and next to it is the volts indicator, which allows monitoring the generator's performance. Just below the manifold temperature gauge, we can specifically select which generator we want to monitor and see the power it is producing. This is the CGFL ASK control panel I mentioned earlier. This is the anti-skid indicator panel. These indicators allow us to determine if any of the anti-skid systems are not functioning properly. This is the attitude heading reference system. It allows selection and configuration of the navigation module. In our simulator, it is non-functional. Moving here, we see the HF radio panel. It is used for long-range communication, for example. When the aircraft crosses an ocean, the crew reports their position. In the simulator, it functions as the COM3 radio. This is the co-pilot's oxygen regulator. This is the battery control panel. The battery is currently on. Here we can charge and test the battery. Normally, the aircraft operates in the standard configuration, but it's also possible to switch to emergency power. That will place the system into a degraded mode, in which the aircraft runs off the forward battery in case of an emergency scenario. Here on the sidewall is the engine's start panel. One of the unique features of the B-52 is its engine start control switch and start mode selector. As you can see, there are several modes: cartridge, flight, and pneumatic. For each individual starter, we have start, off, and continuous positions. Depending on whether the selector is in pneumatic, flight, or cartridge mode, the system will perform different start procedures accordingly. I will explain in detail how all of these switches operate during the engine start procedure in the next part of the tutorial. This is an additional oil temperature monitoring gauge, which makes it convenient to read values during engine start. This switch allows enriching the fuel mixture and is used for engine starts at sub-zero temperatures. This is the crossbleed air manifold switch, engaged during pneumatic engine start. Below the engine start panel, we can also see the co-pilot's circuit breaker panel, similar to the left side. And finally, this small panel at the rear is used for ground checks of the fuel system instruments. And this is essentially a complete overview of all the systems at the captain's and co-pilot's stations. Now we move on to the second part of the tutorial, which covers engine startup and preparing the aircraft for taxi.